everybody, welcome back to another episode of Reason for Truth. I'm your host, Stevie Garofalo. Today I want to talk to you about commonalities of the rich and the poor. We got a lot of discussion in this country about the rich and the poor. And listen, Proverbs 22:2 says this: the rich and the poor have a common bond. What is that? The Lord is the maker of them all. The NIV, puts it this way. It says, rich and poor have this in common: the Lord is the maker of them all. Listen, most all hold to the false belief that the rich have it all. Listen, the poor have nothing. I guess it depends on what you mean by have it all. That's a good question. Listen, if you have a great family, if you don't have a lot of money, I think you're much richer than the most wealthiest who are miserable and without family. Welcome to Reason for Truth, where the truth comes first and the reasons come last, but where we're always and constantly learning, because listen, when we stop learning, we stop teaching. Or at least stop teaching what? Well, today's truth is that time, death, and destiny, these are all things that don't discriminate according to the color of skin, ethnic background, political side you're on, according to one's level of wealth or even lack thereof. Ecclesiastes 3:19 says that surely the fate of human beings is like that of the animals. It's kind of rough. Same fate awaits them both. As one dies, so does the other. All have the same breath. Humans have no advantage over animals. Everything is meaningless. So listen, today I'm going to show you three important things, and a lot of other things, but three basic things that the rich and the poor involuntarily share according to the Apostle James and other biblical passages. Today we're going to camp a little bit more with Solomon and Ecclesiastes. We're going to move on to James in this part 2. This is a 2-part series. Furthermore, I'm going to show you what James tells us in chapter 1 when we get there, how we are to act in light of what the Lord has blessed us with, however little or however much that might be. Let's start today's journey by looking at Washington Post article. It's called The Hidden Inequality of Who Dies in Car Crashes by Emily Badger and Christopher Ingram. This is from back in October 1st, 2015, posted at 8:23 a.m. EDT. Emily and Christopher wrote that the less educated and the less wealthy tend to be more susceptible to die in a car crash due to the fact that they own cars that are older or have less tested ratings and less money for fancy safety features such as side airbags, automatic warnings, and rear cameras. I'll be honest with you, sold my car after 9 years. It didn't have any of those things. And I'm not poor, but I'm not rich. I guess I don't know where I fall in there. But the number of trauma centers also decline in poor and rural communities. I thought about that. I thought that was interesting because if you combine the poor with rural, it depends on how you define rural, right? That's a good part of the United States of America. And by the way, that makes up probably the vast majority. And the article closes out this way. It says this: as we increasingly fantasize about new technologies that will save us from our own driving errors, cars, that will brake for us, or things like spot cyclists when we can't see them, or even take over the navigation of the vehicle, it says this, we should anticipate that at first these benefits may mostly go to the rich. I tend to agree with them. You ever see what it costs to buy an electric car? You've seen what it costs to replace the batteries. In a second article I read on Slate, SLATE.com, titled Death Styles of the Rich and Famous, the Upper Class Has Its Problems Too. That's by Jacob Weinberg. That was published on June 14th, 2006 at 3:45 p.m. Weinberg wrote this: there are diseases of poverty, such as tuberculosis, malaria, HIV, AIDS. There are diseases of affluence, such as lung cancer, high blood pressure, and type 2 diabetes. And there are hazards of extreme affluence as well, things such as being thrown off a polo pony, flipping your cigarette boat, or succumbing to altitude sickness on a vanity expedition to the Himalayas. That's really code for those who want to pay a lot of money to climb Mount Everest to say, I climbed Mount Everest. I guess there you go. Weinberg went on to say this. He says, this point was brought home this week with the presumed death by drowning of Philip Merrill, the Mid-Atlantic press baron who owns Washington Magazine. The 72-year-old Merrill was sailing alone on his 41-foot boat, probably without a life jacket, when he fell into the Chesapeake Bay. And the writer saying, I mean no disrespect to Merrill or his family when I say that the risk of meeting this sort of end goes into the small but poetic category of a problem unique to the rich and famous. Members of the middle class do not worry about falling off $250,000 sailboats because, well, they don't have $250,000 sailboats to fall off of. Well, I guess he's right about that. Ed Weinberg nears the end of the article with these words. He says this: if you aren't worried that the Senate might not fully repeal the inheritance tax for estates above $5 million, you probably don't need to be worrying about these perils either. And that must have been when that was on the legislative docket when this was published. Now, I thought it was interesting. These two articles were interesting for a number of reasons. First article focused on the problem of the poor, meaning those living in something less or, something better that was not really defined as wealthy, including rural areas. This makes up really, again, the vast majority, what I guess is probably 70% of America. Maybe I'm wrong. The article focused on the fact that so many poor people are dying from the lack of infrastructure and safety features on vehicles due to their inability to live in more expensive areas that can afford such a thing. The second article focused on the fact that, only wealthy people can die from, drowning on your yacht or on your piloting and crashing your own airplane because you afford your own airplane, right? What I found interesting is that both the rich, the poor and the middle class, and the wealthy and the poor, they all share one thing in common: the rich and the poor. And that's, one way or another, they all die. They have to just die of different things. They may die differently, but they all die. With 100% certainty, I can promise you today that if the Lord doesn't return in our lifetime, that we too, along with every person on the planet Earth right now, both rich and poor, weak and powerful, all will face the same mortal physical death. They will at least face death, not the same death, but death nonetheless. Death does not discriminate regarding how much money you have, how much money you don't have, how much money you think you're going to have, or how much money you want. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how powerful you are. People grow old, they die. Now, before we jump in today's passage, which, again, I started with James 1:11, but we're going to move to Ecclesiastes, let's take a deeper look at the words of King Solomon. That's where I want to actually go. Let's start there. Ecclesiastes 3:19, it says this: for what happens to the children of man and what happens to the beasts is the same. As one dies, so dies the other. They all have the same breath, and man has no advantage over the beasts, for all is vanity. Verse 20 goes on to say, all go to one place, all are from the dust, and to dust all return. Who knows whether the spirit of man goes upward and the spirit of the beast goes down into earth? So I saw that there was nothing better than that a man should rejoice in his work, for that is his lot. Who can bring him to see what will be after him? Verses 19 to 22. And by the way, saying that animals and people all go to heaven, that's a whole different discussion. That's really not the context what it's saying here. It's basically saying, all living creatures, we're included in that. We're made in God's image. Animals are not. But we all came from this earth. We all go back to the dust. That's what it's saying. Same fate from that physical burial perspective. Now, King Solomon is making a simple point in this passage that, though both man and beast suffer a common fate and they return to the dust, man will face God's judgment. Chapter 12:14, you can read that. God is clear that each one of us should serve him, God, faithfully in this very short life that we have. He has given us, enjoying what God has given us, however much he gives us, however long he gives us to be on this earth, we're to honor him and make good use of our time. God gives different people, folks, different talents, different gifts, different levels of wealth to manage. Each person is not given the same or the right to the same because that is not his will. That's not our lot for life. I know a lot of people have a whole lot more money than me, and I know people who have less money than me. The secret is that the rich and the poor can both experience the same levels of joy in life. Some people are saying, really? As each one has been given a lot in life, as Solomon says, there's nothing better than that a man should rejoice in his work, for that is his life. Passage tells me three things here. First, each person, despite one's level of wealth, has a God-ordained unique mission, some kind of job or plan for their life. We need to figure that out, being in the Word and prayer, and the Holy Spirit can open those doors and show you what Word of God's going to guide you. Second, there's nothing better than you can do than to rejoice in your God-given lot. That's the mission he's given you. Third, we can conclude that to covet another's mission and to focus on making wealth for the sole reason of becoming rich outside of God's unique lot for your life leads only to the opposite of what Solomon calls rejoicing in life, right? And I once had that young man come up to me not too long ago. We were on a camping trip. He says, Mr. Garofalo, I'm going to become a millionaire. He says, a lot of people say they're going to become a millionaire. I'm going to do it. I looked at them and I said, I know your personality. Listen, you are going to become a millionaire if that's what you want. Question is that really what you want? And to go and to become a millionaire for becoming a millionaire's purpose, just for that sole reason, you're going to end up miserable probably in life. It's great to do what God has called you, your lot in life. And listen, do it well. If you want to go into business, you probably will become a millionaire, but you'll also be happy if you do the right things and handle your money correctly and handle other people, treat them well. Now, Solomon closes out, and by the way, his parents thanked me for saying that after I told them the story later. Bright young man, but hey, I think all young men want to strive, and all young men want to be successful, and I think it's great. That's why we guide the younger generation, right? So Solomon closes out with these famous words in verse 22. He says, "So I saw that there is nothing better than that a man should rejoice in his work, for that is his lot. Who can bring him to see what will be after him?" What he's saying there is after you pass from this life, you get buried, you go to be in the presence of the Lord. At the end of our life, Solomon says regarding the material wealth that we amass in this lifetime that, listen, first at death, the achiever, the person that's very wealthy simply is going to give control over the fruit of his labor, all his wealth, all their houses, money, whatever they happen to have. They're going to hand it over to someone else who may very well squander it. You don't see many families where they do well with that wealth generation after generation. It does happen, but it also that you create, in that sense, where it's great that the families pass on the traditions and the businesses, you also find out that sometimes people don't get to do really what they're called to do because they're expected to go in the family business. I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. I'm just saying these are all complexities of wealth. See, it's not as easy as you think it is. So they could squander it too. Verses 11, 18, and 19 make that clear. That's number one. Second, listen, the achiever who seeks wealth above God's ordained lot, the plan for his life, never really benefits from the fruit of his labor. Listen, his heirs do. His kids do. Verse 20 to 21. I know so many people that tell me their parents just worked their butt off, never really enjoyed themselves, didn't take a lot of trips, if any, didn't spend a ton of time with them, and then passed them on a great deal of money. And listen, that it's sad, but I guess if you find joy in your work, it just needs to be more balanced. You don't want to do that to the detriment of forgetting those you love or others, right? Okay. In other words, they get the privilege of working their life away for someone else to enjoy. That's number two. Number third is the achiever has little chance to achieve his achievements in his life because he spends most of his lot of time in life doing hard work and accruing a lot of money, and along with that comes the stress and the worries that come along with gaining great wealth. Verses 22 to 23 make that very clear. Workaholism and passion for power most often dominate the life of the wealthy, resulting in the forfeiture of their being able to rejoice in the lot of the Lord, the lot that the Lord has given them. And we're going to pick up with that in part 2 when we look then finally at James chapter 1, verse 11. I want to camp on that one verse and speak to the fact that, listen, the rich often squander their lot in life and they in pursuit of life, in wealth. When I say squander, I'm not talking about their money, I'm talking about the lot, the things God's really given them, and they go after making money and more achievement so much to become number one that everything revolves around them, and then all their relationships and their family and the things that God called them to share his word with others, they get pushed as a far second and then or eliminated at all. Now, if you think I'm picking on the rich, that's not true. Listen, the poor often as well squander their own ability to rejoice in the lot that God has given them. Why? Because they're too worried about how much the rich people have. What do? They act slothful. They don't get a job. They live off of other things and other people or the government. They often fail to use their God-given gifts in an equal amount of time that God has given. God has given the poor and the rich the same amount of time in seeking to fulfill God's lot for their life because they are too busy demanding that, listen, they don't have what the rich has. In conclusion, every person, whether wealthy or poor, have been given 24 hours in a day, 7 days in a week, and a general lifespan of 70 to 80 years on average, if God wills. I'm not saying that some classes of people or some groups of people don't have more advantages. That's true. Some do. But listen, at the end of the day, we all have to have the attitude as believers in Jesus Christ. It doesn't matter what someone else has. It doesn't matter what color they are. What we have to do is look to the Lord. I promise you, he will provide for you rightly. Right? The single factor that determines one's success or failure in life is not how much money or how much power one has, but really what they do with the unique lot that God has given them in life. Listen, I hope you're going to see or seek God's word and how, and work hard at a sense of contentment the Lord's given you. I'm not talking about just be contentment and don't look at moving forward with things, but regarding the lot that God has given you, go as far as you can, depend on the Lord to deliver you above and beyond that. Remember, what we do with the lot here that God has given us on earth is just a dress rehearsal for the next life. Listen, I hope you'll pray and act on that. And in closing, please subscribe and hit the alert bell. You know what I always say, boom, go ahead, left Sicilian hook, that little bell down there. You have to do that in addition to subscribe. You can make sure you don't miss any of these. Now, please remember to leave any comments below. I promise we'll get back to you. I'm going to respond within a very, very reasonable amount of time. And if you're listening on one of our podcast platforms, there are many of them, just about all of them, please consider certainly at least a 5-star review in iTunes. We are hosted there. We're hosted with Spreaker, but we're also have our feed on iTunes. Now listen, next week, make sure you tune in for part 2 of What the Rich and Poor Hold in Common. And again, if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you subscribe, smash that alert bell. Don't want to miss that, then you won't miss that episode. Listen, we'll see you in the next Reason for Truth episode. I'm your host, Stephen Garofalo, and this is your Reason for Truth for today.